Hi guys, and welcome to this month's step-by-step video. For this month, which is February 2021, I will interrupt just briefly, just for this month, the interactive sessions, which I love, by the way. But for this month, I've got a little bit of a different plan for the Patreon illustration of the month. So I am going to try and attempt to do some traditional art, which for me is kind of new. It's going to be interesting. And since I don't think that I am an actual authority on the subject, I think I would rather just journal my attempt to do traditional art rather than having a Q&A about it. So as you can see here, I've got my sketch, which I did on Procreate, and I can show you now how I did it with a little Procreate time-lapse. This character is called Helia. She is the spirit of the sun. She is the counterpart to my previous character that I drew this month that is called Celine. And Celine is the spirit of the moon. She is the spirit of the sun. Helia is very much the big sister that nobody wants to have. She's the sort of larger-than-life person who's always on and everybody loves her because she's so fun, but also she's a bit of a mess and kind of irresponsible. So Celine, who's the little sister actually, has to be much more responsible than Helia. And what I wanted to convey in this illustration is exactly that, the idea that, you know, she's a character that is very bombastic, and that goes from, you know, the kind of pose that I'm using, the color choices, so a lot of orange and yellow and purple. She looks a bit like a circus freak, I think, in this illustration specifically, and I did that on purpose, while Celine's costume is a lot more minimal and sort of understated. Instead, she's very much, I wouldn't say tacky, but, you know, definitely her choices are on the loud side with her massive earrings, the crown, and, you know, she is literally a star, so of course she's gonna behave like one. The reason why I did the sketch on Procreate is because, of course, being a digital artist, I am much more comfortable with Procreate, and also I like the idea that I can just change the sketch and refine it as much as I want on Procreate. And also I wanted to develop the color palette on Procreate because I am not very comfortable mixing paints, so I also don't have that many of them. So I thought, you know, I'll just get the color palette out of the way on Procreate, and then I will just focus on the actual execution of the painting in traditional. I have this very old gouache palette set that I bought when I used to go to uni in London. I got these from Cass Art because they were on sale. And, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to London or if you went to uni to London, but basically there is this art shop that is called Cass Arts, and it's just behind Trafalgar Square, and that's where I used to go to get my paints and all my school supplies. Even though it's probably like kind of expensive and in a touristy area, I just love the feeling of going to Trafalgar Square and getting a coffee and walking around and getting my paints. Even though it felt touristy, it also felt like I was in a movie or something. So I got these on sale, and actually I can see now that I am missing two of them. So I'm gonna rummage through the rest of my supplies, which are just like a hodgepodge of things that I bought all over the place and over like time. So I'm gonna have a look and see if I can find some more gouache, because yeah, the technique that I wanted to use was just very flat with an outline, just 1 or 2 tones darker than the color in the element, basically trying to replicate the same style that I used for the Celine's artwork, but with traditional paint. And of course, with the Celine's artwork, the inside of the cloak was an actual picture of the universe that I used as a flat texture. So instead, for Helia's cloak, I'm gonna use a very flat texture like this one, but I'm just gonna paint it instead of using a picture. So that's the plan. I hope I can actually do it, so that's gonna be interesting. First thing first, let's try and find some more supplies. So these are my chests of art supplies, and they are a mess because I am a messy person. Just random. I think they might be inside here. Yeah. Okay, here I definitely have some paints. I probably don't need the calculator, but that's where they were, the other gouache that I was looking for early on. Okay, let's take this whole box. Yeah, I've also got this ink because I spent like quite a long time trying to work with inks when I was younger. I've got like some skin kind of color, which is gonna be useful. Okay, so I'm just gonna try and prep a color palette on a plate so that I can start painting. Actually, probably I should do a sketch on the actual support that I'm gonna use, right? I think that's probably the best idea. Okay, so for the first step in this process, I am going to take my printed sketch from Procreate and I'm gonna draw a grid on top of it, and that way I can easily reproduce the sketch on the support that I'm gonna use for painting. I actually have a light table. The lighting table is basically a support that projects light so that you can put 2 pages on top of the table and it will help you see from the page underneath where you have your sketch and you can do your line art. But I'm using a thick piece of cardboard for this painting because I'm going to be using gouache and I don't want the paper to wrinkle, and I don't have any other paper at home at the moment because this is a very sort of like spontaneous kind of digital artist tries to do traditional art sort of video. I'm just literally using stuff that I have around the house, and around the house I only have this, which was the back of a paper sketch pad. I think this one is definitely too thick to be able to see through the lighting table. So instead I'm going to use this other technique that I was actually taught in primary school by my primary school teachers. So I'm going to switch the camera to my DSLR, which is already set up. As you can see, this is the setup that I'm using, in case you were wondering. So I have placed the DSLR straight on top of my painting table. And yeah, so hopefully you're gonna be able to have a good view of what I'm doing. Right, so let's get started. So as you can see here, I have my cardboard support, which is what I'm gonna use for the piece. And also I have my sketch. I'm gonna use this ruler and create a grid on top of the sketch, and then I'm gonna recreate the same type of grid with the same amount of square boxes on the support that I'm gonna use, so that I can scale up or down the illustration and the sketch and be able to replicate it very easily on the cardboard. So this is 22 centimeters large. I'm gonna do 20 so that it's easier to calculate. And I'm gonna divide it in 10 2 centimeters boxes. Since this is a triangular ruler, I can just make sure that it's aligned on this side, and then I can just trace the line and I know that it's gonna be straight. Unfortunately, the whole sketch is kind of dark. As you can see, the purple is a little dark. So I hope that you guys can see clearly what I'm doing and the lines that I'm tracing. I have traced down all these vertical lines, and now I'm gonna do the same thing with the horizontal lines of the grid. And since these is a square ratio. I am pretty sure this is also gonna be 20 centimeters. And I'm also gonna divide it by 2 centimeters increments, which is gonna make for a 10 by 10 grid. Again, I am going to be using this side of the ruler to align it to the side of the paper, or I can just align it to the side of the illustration, which is already a straight line, and I can be sure that it's gonna be straight. So now that I have my grid on this paper, I will replicate the same grid, that is a 10 by 10 grid, on this piece of cardboard. The great thing about this method is that you don't need to have the same size from the sketch paper to the painting canvas that you're going to be using. You can have a smaller size or bigger size. The important thing is that you replicate the same amount of boxes in the grid, and then you can scale it up or down by looking at the grid on your sketch and at the same grid on your painting support, and just place the lines that you have on the sketch on the painting support. For now, let's just focus on creating the same type of grid on this paper, which happens to be the same size of my sketch, but again, you could be using a different size and it would be exactly the same. So now that I have my grid, which is absolutely the same as this grid, it's 10 by 10, I can look at this sketch and basically replicate the same lines from the sketch to this paper, right? I'm gonna start with the face of this character, and I see that the face is standing 3 squares down and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares in the middle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. It's where the face is. So I'm gonna start by tracing the chin and the cheeks. And I can see that the face sort of arrives halfway through the second box from the top. So here's where it will arrive. The conjunction between the right side temple and the fringe is actually here at the convergence between the first box from the top and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the 5th box this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So as you can see, it's really super easy to do a sketch in Procreate or Photoshop or any other medium that you feel more comfortable with. And then you can simply use the grid to make sure that you can replicate it accurately on your support. So for example, here I was already going slightly wrong, as in the neck is actually halfway between the 5th and the 6th box from the left, so here. And then you have the breast that goes in a diagonal on the 4th box down to 1, 2, 3, 4 to touch the 4th box from the left. For example, for the long lines like this thigh here that goes down this way, you can just mark the start of the line, the start of the long line, and then the end of that line, so that you can trace a long line that is swooping and it's not stiff, basically, instead of worrying about just tracing through each box and checking, exactly where you got to each box. Also, you can do this kind of by eye, like you don't need to be checking that you are hitting the exact same spot on both sketch and painting. I mean, the important thing is that you're roughly following the same sort of shapes. Step 2 is that I need to mask the inside of my character so that it doesn't get covered by me when I color in the background. So my intention here is to mask the whole thing and then get a small knife and actually try and design a more accurate silhouette for the character and the masking tape so that the borders of the character are just a little more true to the actual sketch. There is a very good chance that I'm gonna ruin all of this. So I've just grabbed my little cutting knife and I'm going to try and just cut along the sketch. Incredibly, it seems like I'm actually starting to get somewhere with this. I honestly thought I was gonna ruin it. So here I am trying to create my color palette for this piece. So I want to use the purple, like the dark purple for the background. So I am mixing magenta and blue, although it's coming out really dark. So I am probably going to lighten it up a little bit. Some white, maybe it's too much white, I'm not sure. I think that this is okay for the color of the dress, but it's probably too light for the background. So I'm gonna take some of it and put it on the other side here and darken it a little bit with some more blue. This is like more similar. It's actually quite similar to this. One thing that I would say if you're mixing paints, and something that I often get wrong, is that you need to make sure that you mix all of it before you start using it and putting it on paper, because otherwise you might just start using it and then you sort of like stir it a little more after a while, and then new colors that was previously underneath comes through and starts to get mixed in, and so the color actually changes slightly as you keep going. But I am trying it here, and maybe it's just a tad too blue. I'm gonna use like literally just a tiny bit of black, which is already actually making it much darker. Maybe it's too dark now, so a little bit of purple again, well, magenta to be exact. More magenta. This is definitely the worst part for me about painting with traditional art. I think this is okay. Yes, I believe we got to the point that we were trying to reach. So I'm just gonna put this away and use a different brush, because this brush is actually really crap. As you can see, it's super like, it isn't very rigid, it's like it's super bendy, and so I'm just gonna wash it. I'm gonna get this paintbrush, which is like a flat sort of paintbrush, which I think can be useful for the background, and also maybe this paintbrush that is also pretty big. Maybe before I go on, I should also mix the orange. Painting in this case, I kind of like the idea of keeping my brush strokes on the drawing. I think that will give a nice sort of textury feeling. to the piece, so I'm not too worried about smoothing out the color excessively, because again, I kind of like the idea of having like a very sort of textury feeling where you can recognize the brush strokes. So as you might have noticed, I have very little experience with actual traditional like brush strokes, so I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to be reasonably steady with my arm and just kind of like laying out the color as evenly as I can. So you can see I've already made my first mistake. Okay, I've just taken this bigger brush. I love this brush because it's like super soft but also like really bouncy. So I'm completely covering all the area with a cloak. I think I need some more orange actually. Okay, so obviously as you can see I didn't have enough orange, so I'm gonna have to make some more. Definitely a good thing to learn in this case is that magenta is a really strong color, and even if you put like a tiny bit of it with yellow, it's gonna be magenta, like dark orange forever. So just be sure when you mix magenta and yellow that if you want a light orange, you only use a tiny amount of magenta. I'm gonna use a smaller brush to do the outlines. Since I actually inadvertently did some darker orange with the second batch of orange, I'm gonna try and turn this into an asset by adding some more variance to the coat and just like painting some strokes in the direction of the folds of the cloak. So like the folds are sort of coming down from the two pointy areas to the bottom of the cloak. So I'm gonna paint like this with strokes that go downwards and towards the center of the cloak. So it's in these cases when I have to do the actual outlines of a piece that is traditional that I really wish I had the pinching zoom like in Procreate. Because I feel like every time I have to do this kind of like very steady outlines, I'm like, my hand is gonna wobble. Also, I made a mistake over here, so I'm gonna correct it by adding some more purple, because obviously purple is darker than orange, and so if I add some purple, I am pretty sure that I can cover up the orange. Maybe I just need to wait for the orange to actually dry up, because it seems like it's still too wet. So I'm gonna take a break to wait for the orange to dry up for a second. So I have waited a little bit so that maybe now the orange is sufficiently dry for me to actually do the outline correctly, if I can. This is so hard. I admit that drawing without the opportunity of control Zing the shit out of a piece is very hard. So far so good. Now I'm gonna have to actually see if the masking worked. Okay. Coming along. Could have been worse. I feel like as a first attempt to mask something, it's gone pretty well. I'm not gonna lie. The sketch is a bit of a mess now because the masking tape has taken with it a lot of the sketch. So I'm not in a great position, I must say, but I am going to try and make the best out of it, okay? So I'm going to do the color for the skin. I'm using this buff titanium acrylic, which is definitely too light. So I'm putting a tiny bit of magenta, still a little bit too light. So I'm gonna put a little bit of orange. I think I have some brown, still too light. Some more brown. This brown doesn't mix awfully fast, doesn't seem to affect the pink quite as much as I thought it would be. Yeah, I think that's okay. Okay, so overall, I feel like so far doing a sketch that was this complex was kind of like a waste of time because with painting the skin, I'm basically just painting over the sketch. So yeah, I could have just like not done it and it would have been exactly the same. Also, I think it's because I used this sort of like cardboard support. The paper tape tore through some of the support, so now it doesn't look great, I must say. I proceeded to color the body and the skin tone. Of course, now I have a different problem, which is that I have completely covered my original sketch. So this is gonna be fun. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. This is not gonna be fun because I wanted to have a sketch underneath, and now I don't have it. I am gonna attempt to use the orange again. Just trying to get rid of some of the lumps that like formed over here. I'm quite glad that I started off with a rather light orange, so that now I can just add on to it and it's not gonna look too weird, I hope. So now I'm gonna refresh this light purple, which is the one that I want to use for the clothes. And I am going to hopefully not fuck up the clothes too much. Here's to hoping. So one additional issue in this whole endeavor is that now the cardboard piece that I'm using to do this painting is actually very rough because some of it, as I was saying before, has been torn off by the masking tape, which I thought wouldn't harm the piece of cardboard since it's just paper, but apparently it did. So because now it's pretty rough, this surface that I'm painting on, it's actually really hard to get a good stroke on it. So on second thoughts, I wouldn't recommend to use cardboard for this sort of painting, or if you do, I wouldn't recommend putting a ton of masking tape on it and then just sort of like tear it off, because apparently it can cause problems. So now that I've sort of framed in the body, the dress, the background and the cloak, I am going to frame in the hair.
I have definitely made some progress, and I have used some of my pro markers to actually fill in the details of the skin, and this is because my brush is a little too big, I think, and I can't really get in and do those like really tiny details. I don't want to go overly detailed because I kind of like the idea of this being very flat and very minimal, also because the color palette is very minimal, so it makes sense. But at the same time, I do want to give it a little bit more detail in the cloak and around the eyes. So I'm gonna proceed with that.
I'm trying to work on the hair a little bit because I didn't really like the way that it was looking with the marker made outlines. So I'm gonna try and do something a little different, just trying to add some tonal difference to the hair. I don't know, just don't think that's the right sort of color. But I'm not really sure what color it should be. Luckily, as you can see, I made a tone of this light yellow, so at least I'm able to repaint over and over the hair until I get it right. Which is kind of annoying for sure, but at least, you know, I'm keeping my options open. I don't know, maybe I should do it dark purple. I know it doesn't really relate to the original hair color, but maybe that's a good idea. I don't know, let's try. In general, I think it's a good idea to add some dark purple, which is also the color of the background, so that the hair looks thinner, because I am essentially erasing it since I'm using the background color to add more shape detail to the strands of hair. So I was saying before, the main issue here is that my paintbrush is kind of big for the level of detail that I'm doing, and also that the cardboard is now really bumpy, and that is creating a lot of problems for me because I keep getting lumps. But I definitely prefer these thinner sort of like strands of hair. I think that is bringing the shape to a whole new level of clarity, and also it's making it look lighter and more dynamic. So I'm a lot happier with the back of the hair. And now for the inside of the two main strands of hair falling in front of the body. So I'm gonna try with the purple even on the strands of hair falling in front of the body. It's probably not gonna look good, so let's see. Actually, I know it's not gonna look good. So instead, I'm gonna try with the pink and with the orange, as if basically the strands of hair are broken up by the fact that they're just sort of like breaking apart, and therefore you can see behind it over the orange cloth. Okay, so it's definitely too thick to do that. The paintbrush, I mean, it's really hard to work around the fact that it's so thick and there's so many bumps around the hair now. So what I'm gonna try instead is that I'm gonna try and find a pro marker that looks kind of similar from my pro marker bag and see if that can work instead. I think it's gonna be fine. Mostly because I can't be asked anymore, which is always a good reason to stop doing something. Wow, so that was a lot. I spent basically the whole day just working on this piece. I can honestly tell you that this is probably the best thing I've ever done in gouache. I mean, it doesn't mean much because I haven't really worked on gouache that much in my life, but it's still pretty good. What can I say about this? About the whole process? I think that what I got to understand during the whole piece was that my original sketch was definitely too detailed as a style for this dimension of gouache painting and this support, because as you can see here, I basically tore through quite a lot of the cardboard using the masking tape, which really shouldn't happen, but I feel like it did because this is cardboard and it's not canvas. So I'm sure that if you use a canvas, this sort of problem wouldn't really happen, or at least it wouldn't happen as much. But aside from that, I feel like in general, this sort of style with a lot of signs, a lot of lines, a lot of complex anatomy and complex shapes, like these little curly things at the end, it doesn't really work here. I mean, I kept them in the end because they were part of, of the design, and I was already forward enough that I had to keep it, but I don't think that it works as well in this style. And also the anatomy and the clothing and everything, I had to simplify it a lot. Also the eyes and the mouth, like if you look at up close, you can see that they're super simple. but I think that they actually work better this way. When I understood that, I think that the painting took a much better turn, and I was able to use these swirly motifs that I think are cute and add a lot of dynamic movement to the whole piece. So overall, I'd say if you're attempting this sort of thing on gouache, choose a better paper support or a better canvas support, and definitely not the cardboard back of a notepad, because that will probably tear quite easily. Also, perhaps choose like a slightly bigger piece of canvas or support, because this is how big this is and it's not big at all. Definitely one thing that I would recommend and that I thought it was really useful was printing out the palette thumbnail from Procreate, so that I could actually match the colors exactly on the paper, so I could see easily if I was getting the right kind of purple blue, the right kind of orangey, the right kind of skin tone. That was super useful, because in the past I've just barreled through watercolors and wash paintings, just sort of going, yeah, I'm gonna just improvise it, and that never ends well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend doing the sketch on Procreate if you're feeling more comfortable there, and printing out the actual palette. Use a very simple sort of palette. Like in this case, I literally have 4 colors. In this one, I actually almost like limited it to 3 colors really. The skin tone, the orange yellow, and the light purple and dark purple, that are the same purple, just different hues. I quite like the fact that you can see the paint strokes, like here as well. I feel like that gives a really nice materic feeling to the piece. Yeah, just try to go as symbolic and minimal as you can, but just keeping the colors really pumped. So that way you have a really nice color effect that like gives you the wow factor. At the same time, you're not loading yourself with loads of difficult anatomy to replicate with a very small space. That's about it for this process. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Actually, I hope you enjoyed it more, because there were definitely bits in there where I was despairing and I was like, why did I choose to do this? Why am I trying to do this? I wasted my time and now I'm gonna have to do a completely different thing because this is never gonna work. But in the end, it did kind of work, so I hope that you guys, yeah, enjoyed it, and it was an emotional roller coaster for me. But yeah, I think I need to try more gouache, and I think I need to get some better canvases ready to try it, and some smaller brushes. It was a nice way of spending a different kind of day, not at my laptop or my iPad, so there's something to say about that. You guys let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I will see you for the next illustration of the month next month. Bye!